There's a particular moment that happens in every therapist's office, usually after months of sessions, when a successful, accomplished adult suddenly stops mid-sentence and says something like, "I don't understand why I feel this way. I had a good childhood. My parents provided everything I needed." And yet, sitting there, they're describing a life shadowed by a persistent sense of inadequacy, a gnawing fear that they're somehow fundamentally flawed, and an exhausting need to prove their worth through endless achievement. This is the paradox that Carl Jung spent decades unraveling. How can someone who seemingly had everything still carry such profound insecurity? How can a child who was fed, clothed, housed, and educated grow into an adult who feels emotionally starved? The answer lies not in what happened to them, but in what didn't happen. Not in the presence of trauma, but in the absence of something essential. Jung discovered that the human psyche requires more than physical care to develop healthily. It needs what he called psychological nourishment, the consistent emotional presence, validation, and attunement that tells a developing child they matter, they're seen, and their inner world is valued. When this nourishment is missing, something profound shifts in the architecture of the developing mind. Modern neuroscience has begun to validate what Jung intuited nearly a century ago. Recent studies using brain imaging technology show that children who experience emotional neglect develop measurably different neural pathways than those who receive consistent emotional attunement. The regions responsible for self-worth, emotional regulation, and social connection show distinct patterns of underactivity, creating what researchers now call the neglect signature in the brain. But here's what makes Jung's insights so revolutionary. He understood that this isn't just about damaged neural pathways or chemical imbalances. It's about the formation of what he called complexes, autonomous psychological structures that operate like separate personalities within our unconscious mind, each carrying its own emotional charge, its own beliefs, and its own agenda for how we should navigate the world. If you've ever wondered why you react so strongly to certain situations that others seem to handle easily, why you find yourself caught in patterns you can't seem to break, or why success never quite fills the emptiness you carry inside, then understanding Jung's insights about emotional neglect could transform how you see yourself and your possibilities for healing. Before we explore these profound discoveries that have helped thousands understand and transform their deepest insecurities, make sure to subscribe and turn on notifications if you value deep psychological wisdom over surface-level advice. This channel is dedicated to exploring the life-changing truths that can genuinely transform how you experience your inner world. Now let's discover what Carl Jung understood about how emotional neglect creates lifelong insecurity, and more importantly, how this understanding becomes the key to finally breaking free from patterns that may have been running your life for decades. Jung's understanding of emotional neglect begins with his revolutionary insight that the human psyche develops through relationship. We don't become psychologically healthy in isolation. We become whole through being consistently seen, felt, and responded to by another consciousness. This process, which Jung called psychological mirroring, is as essential for mental development as nutrition is for physical growth. When a child looks into their caregiver's eyes and sees delight, concern, understanding, or appropriate emotional response to whatever they're experiencing, something crucial happens. The child learns that their inner world matters, that their emotions are valid, and that they exist as a significant being worthy of attention and care. This isn't just nice to have, it's neurologically necessary for healthy psychological development. But when that mirroring is absent, when the child's emotional expressions are met with distraction, indifference, or dismissal, the developing psyche draws a devastating conclusion. My inner world doesn't matter. My feelings aren't important. I must not be worth paying attention to. These aren't conscious thoughts, they're felt truths that get encoded into the very structure of the developing self. Jung observed that emotionally neglected children develop what he called premature psychological independence. They learn to handle their emotional world alone, not because they're naturally self-sufficient, but because they've learned that no one else will tend to their inner landscape. This creates what appears to be resilience, but is actually a form of psychological armor that protects them from further disappointment while also cutting them off from the very connections they need to thrive. The tragedy is that this adaptation, while protective, becomes the foundation for lifelong insecurity. The child who learned to manage alone grows into an adult who struggles to believe they deserve care attention, or genuine interest from others. They may achieve remarkable things externally, while internally feeling like imposters who are always one mistake away from being exposed as fundamentally inadequate. Jung's concept of complexes becomes crucial for understanding how emotional neglect creates these persistent patterns. When consistent emotional attunement is missing, the psyche develops what Jung called a wound complex, an autonomous cluster of thoughts, feelings, and behaviors organized around the original experience of not being seen or valued. This complex operates like a separate personality with its own agenda, constantly scanning for evidence that confirms the original wound. The wound complex doesn't just hold pain, it holds the child's original survival strategy. If being needy led to disappointment, the complex might create a compulsive need to be self-sufficient. If showing vulnerability led to dismissal, it might generate perfectionism as armor against criticism. If authentic expression was ignored, it might produce people-pleasing behaviors designed to finally earn the attention that was always missing. What makes these complexes so persistent is that they operate below conscious awareness, automatically triggering responses that once made sense, but now create the very isolation and insecurity they were designed to prevent. The person finds themselves caught in patterns they can't quite understand, reacting with intensity that seems disproportionate to current circumstances, driven by an inner system that's still trying to solve a childhood problem. Modern attachment research has provided a biological foundation for Jung's insights. Studies show that children who experience emotional neglect develop what researchers call insecure attachment patterns, specific ways of relating that are designed to maximize whatever limited emotional connection is available while protecting against the pain of further disappointment. Some children develop an anxious attachment style, becoming hypervigilant about the emotional availability of others, constantly scanning for signs of withdrawal or rejection. They may become clingy, demanding, or manipulative, not because they're naturally difficult, but because they're desperately trying to ensure they won't be overlooked again. Others develop an avoidant attachment style, learning to minimize their emotional needs and present a facade of independence. They may struggle with intimacy, not because they don't want connection, but because closeness activates the old wound of not being emotionally met, creating anxiety and the urge to withdraw. Still others develop what researchers call a disorganized attachment style, oscillating between desperate seeking and terrified avoidance, never quite knowing how to navigate relationships because their early experiences taught them that people are simultaneously necessary and dangerous. Jung understood these patterns not as personality disorders, but as creative adaptations to impossible circumstances. The child's psyche did the best it could with the emotional resources available. The problem is that these adaptations, while brilliant survival strategies for a neglectful environment, become limitations in adult relationships where genuine care and attention are actually possible. The neurological impact of emotional neglect provides another layer to Jung's insights. Research using brain imaging technology shows that emotional neglect affects the development of key brain regions responsible for self-regulation, social connection, and emotional processing. The anterior cingulate cortex, which helps us understand our own emotions and empathize with others, shows reduced activity in adults who experience childhood emotional neglect. The prefrontal cortex, responsible for executive function and emotional regulation, also shows distinct patterns of development in emotionally neglected children. This can manifest as difficulty managing intense emotions, trouble making decisions, and challenges with self-soothing, all of which contribute to the persistent sense of being somehow not quite right that many emotionally neglected individuals carry. But here's where Jung's approach becomes revolutionary. He understood that these neurological changes aren't permanent damage, they're adaptations that can be transformed through conscious psychological work. The brain's neuroplasticity means that new patterns of connection and self-regulation can be developed at any stage of life, but only if we understand what we're working with. Jung's concept of the shadow becomes particularly relevant here. The shadow represents all the aspects of ourselves that we've learned to hide or reject. For the emotionally neglected child, the shadow often contains the very qualities they need most: their capacity for vulnerability, their legitimate needs for care and attention, their right to take up space and be seen. These essential aspects of self get pushed into the shadow not because they're negative, but because expressing them led to disappointment or dismissal. The child learns to hide their neediness, their emotional intensity, their desire for connection, all the parts of themselves that make them human and deserving of care. The cost of keeping these aspects in the shadow is enormous. The person may present a competent, self-sufficient exterior while internally feeling empty, disconnected, and profoundly lonely. They may excel at caring for others while being unable to receive care themselves. They may achieve remarkable success while never feeling truly satisfied or worthwhile. Jung's process of individuation, the lifelong journey of becoming whole, involves what he called shadow integration, consciously reclaiming the disowned parts of ourselves and learning to express them in healthy ways. For the emotionally neglected individual, this means learning to acknowledge their needs, express their vulnerability, and allow themselves to be seen and cared for by others. This integration process often involves what Jung called conscious suffering, the willingness to experience the pain that was too overwhelming to feel as a child, but now can be processed with adult resources and support. This might mean grieving for the attunement that was never received, feeling the anger about being overlooked, or experiencing the terror of genuine vulnerability in relationships. The healing power of conscious relationships becomes central to Jung's approach. While the original wounds occurred in relationship, healing also happens in relationship with others who can provide what Jung called corrective emotional experiences. These are interactions where the person's authentic self is met with understanding, acceptance, and appropriate emotional response. But Jung emphasized that external relationships alone aren't enough. The person must also develop what he called a conscious relationship with the unconscious, learning to provide for themselves the emotional attunement they never received. This involves practices like active imagination, dream work, and what we might now call mindful self-compassion. Active imagination, one of Jung's most powerful techniques, involves consciously dialoguing with the wounded parts of ourselves, providing them with the understanding and care they've been seeking. This might mean visualizing conversations with the neglected child within, offering comfort to the parts that learn to hide, or simply acknowledging the pain that has been carried alone for so long. The goal isn't to fix or eliminate these wounded parts, but to integrate them into a more complete sense of self. The child who learned to be overly independent can develop healthy interdependence. The part that learned to hide its needs can learn to express them appropriately. The aspects that were pushed into the shadow can emerge into conscious awareness, where they can contribute their gifts to a more authentic way of living. Jung's understanding of projection becomes crucial in this healing process. Often, emotionally neglected individuals project their disowned needs and vulnerabilities onto others, either becoming caretakers who compulsively tend to others' emotional needs, or critics who judge in others the neediness they can't accept in themselves. Withdrawing these projections and taking responsibility for meeting our own emotional needs is a crucial step in healing. This doesn't mean becoming selfish or isolated, but rather developing the capacity to nourish ourselves emotionally so that we can engage in relationships from wholeness rather than neediness. The spiritual dimension of Jung's approach recognizes that emotional neglect often creates what he called a spiritual wound, a disconnection not just from others, but from any sense of meaning, purpose, or connection to something larger than oneself. The child who learned they don't matter may grow into an adult who struggles to find meaning in life or feels disconnected from any sense of spiritual belonging. Healing this spiritual dimension often involves what Jung called the religious function of the psyche, not necessarily formal religion, but a capacity for experiencing meaning, transcendence, and connection to the mysteries of existence. This might emerge through art, nature, relationships, or spiritual practice, but it requires first believing that one's own existence matters enough to be worthy of such connection. The creative dimension of healing emotional neglect was something Jung found particularly powerful. He observed that many of his patients began to express themselves creatively as they healed from emotional wounds, as if reclaiming their right to be seen and heard naturally led to authentic self-expression. Creative expression serves multiple functions in healing emotional neglect. It provides a way to process and communicate experiences that have no adequate words. It offers practice in making something visible that was previously hidden, and it demonstrates to the wounded parts of the psyche that their inner world is valuable enough to be given form and shared with others. The social implications of healing emotional neglect extend far beyond individual therapy. Jung believed that widespread emotional neglect contributes to many of our collective problems: the epidemic of anxiety and depression, the difficulty many people have with genuine intimacy, the tendency toward either excessive independence or codependent relationships. When individuals heal their own emotional wounds, they become capable of providing better emotional attunement to the children in their lives, breaking cycles of neglect that might otherwise continue for generations. They also become more capable of creating emotionally nourishing environments in their workplaces, communities, and relationships. The process of healing emotional neglect, according to Jung's understanding, isn't about fixing what's broken, but about reclaiming what was always whole. The capacity for connection, for self-worth, for authentic expression, these aren't things that need to be created from scratch. They're innate human capacities that were interrupted in their development, but can be reawakened through conscious attention and care. This reawakening often happens gradually, through many small experiences of being truly seen and valued. It might come through therapy, but it can also emerge through friendship, creative communities, spiritual practice, or simply through learning to offer oneself the kind of presence that was missing in childhood. Jung's concept of synchronicity, meaningful coincidences that seem to arise from beyond ordinary causation, often becomes relevant in the healing process. As individuals begin to value themselves more deeply, they often notice that life seems to support their healing journey through unexpected encounters, opportunities, or insights that arrive precisely when they're needed. The transformation that Jung described isn't about becoming a different person, but about becoming more fully who you actually are, beneath the adaptations and defenses that emotional neglect made necessary. This authentic self was never damaged, it was simply hidden, waiting for conditions safe enough to emerge. The relationships that become possible after healing emotional neglect are qualitatively different from those that existed before. Instead of unconsciously seeking to fill the original void or defensively protecting against further hurt, the person can engage with others from a place of genuine choice and mutual nourishment. These relationships are characterized by what Jung called conscious love connection, based on seeing and appreciating the other person as they actually are, rather than as a potential source of the validation that was missing in childhood. This kind of love is both more sustainable and more satisfying than relationships based on unconscious need. The professional implications of healing emotional neglect can be profound as well. Many people find that as they heal their core insecurities, they become capable of pursuing work that genuinely aligns with their values and interests, rather than simply seeking external validation or financial security. They may discover creative talents that were suppressed, leadership abilities that were hidden, or helping capacities that emerge from their own healing journey. Jung observed that individuals who successfully integrate their emotional wounds often become what he called wounded healers, people who can use their own experience of healing to help others navigate similar territories. This doesn't necessarily mean becoming a therapist, but rather bringing the wisdom gained through personal healing to whatever roles they play in life. The ripple effects of individual healing extend into every area of life. As people become more emotionally authentic and available, they create environments where others feel safer to be genuine as well. Children growing up around emotionally healed adults receive better modeling for healthy emotional expression and regulation. Communities and organizations benefit from members who can communicate more authentically, set appropriate boundaries, and contribute from their genuine strengths rather than from compensatory patterns developed to manage old wounds. The political and social implications are significant as well. Jung believed that many social problems stem from individuals projecting their unhealed personal wounds onto collective situations. When people heal their own emotional neglect, they become less likely to support leaders or policies that appeal to unhealed wounds and more capable of working toward solutions that serve genuine collective well-being. For those who recognize themselves in this exploration of emotional neglect and its lifelong effects, Jung's message is ultimately one of profound hope. The insecurity you may have carried for decades isn't evidence of personal deficiency. It's evidence of a natural human need that wasn't met during a crucial developmental period. The patterns that feel so automatic and unchangeable are actually creative adaptations that served important protective functions. Understanding them with compassion rather than judgment opens the possibility for conscious choice about how to respond to current situations rather than reacting from old wounds. The healing Jung described doesn't require perfect parents, perfect relationships, or perfect circumstances. It requires the willingness to turn toward your own inner world with the kind of attention and care you may never have received from others. It means learning to become for yourself the consistent, understanding presence that every developing psyche needs. This isn't a one-time achievement, but an ongoing practice of consciousness, self-compassion, and authentic engagement with life. As Jung wrote, the privilege of a lifetime is to become who you truly are. For those who experienced emotional neglect, this privilege requires the courage to reclaim aspects of yourself that were hidden for protection. But the rewards include not just personal healing, but the capacity to offer others the kind of emotional presence that makes authentic human development possible. The child within you who learned to hide, to minimize their needs, to manage alone, has been waiting not for someone else to finally see them, but for you to turn toward them with understanding and care. That turning toward is the beginning of a healing that can transform not just your own life, but the lives of everyone you touch, with your newfound capacity for authentic presence and connection. Your emotional neglect shaped you, but it doesn't have to define the rest of your story. Through conscious attention to your inner world, compassionate integration of your wounded aspects, and gradual practice of authentic relationship, you can heal the insecurities that have shadowed your life and step into the wholeness that has always been your birthright. The journey isn't always comfortable, but it leads to something that no amount of external achievement can provide. The quiet confidence that comes from knowing you matter, you belong, and you have something unique and valuable to offer the world simply by being authentically yourself.